So we live together.
Yep.
We watch football together.
Yep.
We talk about football together.
Yep.
Why don't we just start a podcast?
Sounds like a plan to me.
Welcome back to the Eye Test. It's myself, Lyés, and my boy CultureCams. We're here for yet another episode, and there's been a lot going on. Most notably, the big title decider at the weekend, or Bill the title decider. We'll go on to see how that kind of has implications on the title race between Arsenal and Man City. There's got some big games in midweek. Premier League midweek games are back. But before we get into all of that, Cam, how you been, bro?
Good. I mean, not great actually.
Oh,
We went to the Brentford United game.
Tell them how that was.
And look, we were just laughing hard most of the game. We couldn't. To be fair, we couldn't. At first, we were laughing, and then it was like, "Yo, what are we actually witnessing?" And then Mason Mount almost done it. Listen, I was celebrating my head off, and then all of a sudden, within 2 minutes, before we could even really relax, Tony does what he does, and then they go and get a goal. So it's been an all right week, but obviously, again, we're expecting as well a kind of blockbuster Premier League classic kind of fixture between City, Arsenal. Didn't really deliver, but overall, yeah, I'm all good, man. How are you?
You know what's funny about that Brentford United game, right? I was watching back the goal and like the celebrations and stuff like that. Oh, Brentford, you got to work on your security. I can't lie, bro. I thought it was just us in the Brentford end celebrating. I watched back. That home end was bouncing when Mount scored,
Listen,
bro.
Yeah, let me tell you something as well. So I'm not going to obviously say the person. So somebody came up to me the other day. I was in a party, and they were like, "Yo, did you go to the Brentford game?" And I was like, "Yeah, I went." He was like, "Oh, so I worked there as well." I was like, "Oh, for real?" Yeah. I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Look, let me show you." Then when Brentford scored, all the stewards were celebrating, bro.
When United scored.
The stewards
I
were
heard on Sky
celebrating,
Sports
bro.
in the background. I heard myself, bro.
Yeah.
It's like, Vamos!
Yeah.
I heard myself, bro.
What?
Bro, I promise you.
Oh my god!
I'm telling you, hey, that killed me. Brentford, you guys are becoming a little bit of a tourist attraction, bro. I'll be real. That's the second time I sit in the Brentford end and watch United win. But hey,
days.
man, outside of that, bro, let's talk about the main game of the weekend. Before I do, I forget to do this, bro. I forgot I'm a YouTuber at heart.
Yeah.
Before we do, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure you check out BR, who are, of course, powering this podcast. That being said, let's get into the topic. Arsenal, Manchester City, and the fallout that has commenced since then, because there's been a lot of conversation, and most of it has kind of revolved around the idea that this was, for lack of a better word, a snooze fest. Boring. Tactical chess match. Where do you sit on that? And what do you kind of attribute that to?
I think it's two sides who feel like they have too much to lose, and that's what it was in the end. And because I think everyone's walked away from the game talking about Arsenal, but then I'm sorry, this is when I start to. I don't want to get into a whole topic about big clubs, small club, but this is when I talk about big clubs. Arsenal are away from home, going against Man City, get a point, and then the talk is about how Arsenal played. And that's just because they're the big club. They're the team that everybody talks about because of the size of their fan base, because of talking about Arsenal gets clicks, because of that's what Arsenal generate. You know what I mean? Man City are the ones that had the onus to go and win the game. Now, did Man City try and win the game? Probably. But you walked away from the game with Erling Haaland. I don't even know if he had a shot. I don't even know if Doku, what he did when he came on. Jack Grealish, Phil Foden, he got hooked after 60. KDB looked way off it. Got clamped by Rice like 2-3 times. They were the ones that were not necessarily on it. Arsenal went in there with, let's say, a game plan to obviously keep it tight, do not do what they did last season, and then they succeeded with it. Look, you know how I am as well, right? I've adapted to this era of football because you have to be, for your team to be successful, now you have to kind of have this kind of tactical kind of setup and control games and stuff. But we've mentioned, both of us as well, about how we prefer to see like Klopp football or Ancelotti or whatever. I have no issue with a team parking the bus. And I think the term parking the bus has such a negative connotation because of Diego Simeone, because of Conte, because of Jose Mourinho. People kind of have this perception that parking the bus is anti-football, it's cancerous, Listen, at the end of the day, sometimes you need to do what you need to do to win, to get a result. The only thing that we've mentioned, and you'll probably go into it as well, Arsenal lacked that player that. Now, I'm not saying that we had a better attack. You can argue it. But when Man United had Martial and Rashford, they could get Man United up the pitch. They were devastating on the counter-attack. So we could go to Etihad and get a result, or you could go park the bus at some games and get a result. I think Arsenal just didn't have that. Saka was not good. Havertz was kind of non-existent as well. And Gabriel Jesus, he didn't really do much either. He tried it in aspects, and I think he could have got a goal. But in them transition moments where you turn defense into attack, it just didn't have that moment. But I've never had an issue with teams doing it. Now, listen, if this was Arteta's style of play from match day 1 to 38, now you can have this discussion. But he came, he did what he needed to do, and now he's probably just relying on Arsenal and in a team to take a couple points off Liverpool. And I just think the fallout is a bit dramatic.
And I completely agree, to be honest with you. First of all, on the topic about that kind of, I'll call it a game breaker, right? Yeah, we did have players more suited in those kinds of, okay, we've defended well, we've held our own, and it's time now, the odd chance to get on the break. Yeah, players like Martial and players like Rashford, and even players like Dan James, who, let's not forget, Lingard, even in that 2-1 win, played a big role in that. Those are players that are more adept on the counterattack. And Rashford, when he's on it, he is possibly the best transition player in the league. So, yeah, Arsenal now have players that in other situations, United players can't sniff them. And an actual set possession and an open play, then yeah, a guy like Bukayo Saka is a lot better. But I largely agree with you. I looked at it almost as like a Pep versus Arteta kind of matchup, which we'll talk about in a second, more so in depth. But if you kind of look at it as those two squaring up, I came away from it thinking that Arteta actually beat Pep. If you look at it 1v1, like the two of them were playing chess, because that's what this game really was, a tactical chess match. I think Arteta individually as a coach, his game plan worked better than Pep's in my opinion. And now, of course, it's down to the players to execute that game plan to the max, which I think in some regards both struggled. But I think Arteta's game plan outsmarted Pep's. And I say that like in terms of how narrow Arteta made Arsenal and how narrow they made the pitch for City, basically daring them, because neither City didn't play with actual natural wingers, if you want to call it. Grealish and Doku came in later in the game. They dared them to beat them through Guardiola and Akanji. And a lot of people had an issue when I said, let's. For me, I'm so sick and tired as a neutral of watching this 4 center back era. Like I'd like it to come to an end. Yes, it'll make you a more defensive powerhouse, if you want to call it that. But look how many times Guardiola and Akanji picked up the ball out wide in those attacking positions. Guardiola was heralded for his performance. And I think he played quite well, but it's no coincidence that he was consistently open because they almost dared him to do so. He had, I think, 5 crosses into the box. One of them found his man in Erling Haaland. And even that cross, if you remember it, was like basically above Haaland's head and he was struggling to get it. And the game really only opened up once Doku and Grealish came in, because then you have actual width. And in that moment, Arteta, I think, still reacted to it in a good way, because he immediately took Kivior off. Within 4 minutes, he took Kivior off, brought Tomiyasu in, and then still dared Doku really to, beat us that way. So when you kind of have a team like Manchester City, who we all agree are the best team on the planet when they're firing, and you limit the best goal scorer on the planet to 0 shots on target for I think, at least the second, maybe the third consecutive time this year, if you count Community Shield, you limit players like Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden to pretty poor performances for their own right. And when you look at it as a totality, Arsenal had the better chances in that game. And with more individual quality, like, can you imagine a Hazard maybe in that position Trossard was in at the end? I think Arsenal and Arteta in particular should be more than happy. But one thing I want to focus on this video is look how many times I'm talking about Arteta. Look how many times I'm talking about Pep. Look how many times I'm talking about game plan, reacting, counter-reacting. We've talked about this a lot, Cam. And it's staggering, especially when you talk about Arsenal and City in particular, how often we come out of these games talking more about the managers than we do about the players. And this isn't just a one-off, guys, right? Let's not pretend this is a reactionary take here. The first game was vastly like this as well, too. And you had a Martinelli who, I would say fortunately as well, too, got the winner. But it was a lot similar to how this game worked out. Oftentimes when you talk about City and you talk about Arsenal, the players, I don't want to call them side characters, but they are side characters to the manager.
No, I agree. And it's something that, as you mentioned, that we've been speaking about. And I just think, I think the game obviously now has become a manager's game. You know what I mean? I think, we watching the game of football, but there's so much more that goes into football now. And I think now, as you mentioned, you said side characters. Managers are the main characters. And that's the reality of the situation. I think, like, I actually want to speak about why you think that has become the case, or why is that? Has that always been the case? Has it always been a situation like, because now, like, you look at the game between Arsenal and City, Pep versus Arteta, it was kind of similar to, do you remember when Jose and Liverpool and Chelsea used to play each other back in the day? Benitez versus Jose. Now maybe they don't have as attacking intentions as these two, but it was very boring games. They were often decided by one goal. Then we had that random moment when they had a random 4-4.
That wasn't Mourinho.
That was even Mourinho. That was somebody else. Exactly. Yeah. So them games were so tight, close, very, very boring games. In the end, decided by small factors. But I still think going into them games, you were talking about matchups. You were talking about Gerrard v Lampard. You were talking about what these guys are going to do on the pitch against each other. And I think now it's so much more about who can out-tactic the other, what coach is going to move this piece in order for this to be, to win, you know what I mean? And I just think that is so much more, it's so much different to when I was growing up. You know what I mean? I don't know what you think about that.
It's an interesting hypothesis, because I mean, you look at football as a totality. I don't think this is the first time we've ever seen this. I completely agree.
No, I don't.
Because I think you can even go back further. And the reason we used to herald these Italian teams, I'm not trying to say they didn't have great players. You had Kaká in Milan. You had, I don't have to go through the names, but they were still tactical chess masters, whether it was Trapattoni, whether it was Capello, Marcello Lippi, even Ancelotti of those Milan teams, Mourinho of that Inter team. We were still oftentimes talking about the managers creating these incredible, oftentimes defensive systems whose sole purpose was, let's cancel out the individuals on the other team. And as a system, you look at that, we're talking like old heads here, but like you look at that 94 final, I think it was, between Barca and Milan, like the 4-0 against Cruyff's super team. That didn't have a Van Basten. It didn't have a Holden. It was like a defensive powerhouse, an incredible defensive system, stifling an attacking system. And you saw football for the next few years go in that direction. So one thing I will say is, as much as we want to talk about Pep and Arteta, I think football often transverses where the players do. So Pep, for example, didn't always used to be like this. I think this is the most extreme version of this like system-based team that Pep has ever coached in his life. And I say that because of the players at his disposal, and also what players in today's game look like. So we oftentimes talk about how like the individual aspect of football is kind of dying out now. And you look at it in the players too. The best players in the world are like these athletic beasts that in the right system can kind of play multifaceted roles. I think Pep and Arteta as well have adapted to that. And that's why also, if we talk about down the line, I think that'll change in the next few years, because I think now you're starting to see a return of creative players that also have that physical side.
So you think it's down to the power of the personnel?
I think so. I think players, no matter what you say, managers are the ones that deploy them, but I think players are the ones who dictate how the game is played. Yeah,
I definitely think that. I can agree with that, because as I mentioned, when I said Lampard, Gerrard, and you talk about Roy Keane, Vieira, yes, you're obviously, let's not get it twisted. I'm not saying that we weren't talking about Fergie versus Wenger. We were talking about Fergie versus Wenger. That was a thing. But I also think we were talking about Fergie versus Wenger as people, as characters. They're pressers against each other. They're not saying that we weren't talking about them tactically, but it was more about them as characters. And I think Jose adapted on that as well. I do think Jose coming into the game massively shifted how we look at managers.
Of course.
Jose is probably the biggest superstar manager we've ever seen. And I think when Jose Mourinho came through, and he came through that 4-3-3, that formation in the Premier League and stuff, and even before that, running down the touchline, I think he made people. I remember growing up, and that was when I started really looking at managers, is when Jose Mourinho came through. And I was like, right, this manager's cool. This manager's this. And every single time Chelsea will win, Jose will have a presser that was cold. And all of a sudden, I'm kind of not thinking about Lamps. I'm not thinking about Jog. I'm thinking about Jose Mourinho. That's true. And I genuinely think he's had a massive, massive part to play in that, because Pep Guardiola came through and did amazing things as well. And we were all waxing lyrical, but of course we're still waxing lyrical about Lionel Messi. We're still talking about Iniesta, we're talking about Xavi. We know what Pep Guardiola had done. But when we really started, when it got gripping, was Jose Mourinho versus Pep Guardiola. And I think that influenced this whole manager v manager kind of aspect. Did you get where I'm coming from? That's not from a a personality point of view. Jose Mourinho, of course, was personality, but it's also about what he was doing on the pitch. I think the way he came with kind of, I'm the anti-version of you, and everyone else in the game at that time influenced so much into what we're seeing today in terms of how obsessed we are with managing. But not only that, right? I do think access. I think we have to talk about access to things in life now. When I was growing up again, I'm sounding like an old head. We always sound like old head. When I was growing up, and even people before me, the only time you guys are really getting to break things down is you're out with your friends, you're in school, older generation were in pubs or whatever.
Barbershop talk.
At the game, barbershops, in the game. You're just kind of consuming it that way. So you're going to games, or you're watching it on Match of the Day, or you're watching on TV. You're only thinking about players. You're only thinking about, Thierry, but But now we have so much access. We have so much voice. Look what we're doing. We're sitting on a podcast, being able to talk. People listen to us. You have so much things that people want you to have informed information. And it's something that me and you have spoken about before. People don't view the game anymore as fans. We view the game as analysts. Yeah, I mean, like, you're talking about, I want to be entertained. People are like, you're not fit to analyze the game. I'm like, I just want to watch. I just want to have fun watching the game. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I just want to have fun. That's where it used to be. But I think now, because we consume the game differently, because there's so much information being given, there's so much journalists just giving their views. Everyone's now got kind of like a refined view of how they view the game. I think that's also contributing to this kind of aspect, you know?
No, 100%. I think you look at the money that's in the game now, it's of course going to now stem out in terms of like, everyone is talking about it all of the time. You have so many different websites, you have so many different YouTube channels, you have so many, it's now like a melting pot of anybody is putting their 2 cents in it. That's not a bad thing, right? Conversation is great. Sometimes if you ask me, there's too much, but no, 100%. I think though, because really, like a year ago, I probably felt a lot stronger about this. And we talked about this a year ago, probably around this time as well, too, about like, wow, every time we talk about Pep City, it's always Pep that we're talking about more than anything. But also then I remember last year, for example, and as brilliant of a footballing mind Pep is, and as well as he's putting these players in position to succeed, we were still talking about Kevin De Bruyne. We were still talking about Ilkay Gundogan.
Well, can I say something?
Go ahead.
I do think right now we're living in the moment. Yeah, we're living in this moment right now where every player now, Van Dijk is going to be the GOAT, Salah's the GOAT Prem player, KDB's the GOAT midfielder. We live in their moments. I do think though, when the game goes on 5 years, 10 years, I do think this manager obsessed way that we view the game is going to harm people like KDB's legacies and stuff. I truly do.
You reckon?
I truly do. I think we're going to look at it too much as the Pep era, the Pep this, the Pep that. I think it's going to affect the way we view some people. And listen, it might be nostalgia, but the way we view a Gerrard, we feel like he carried managers, and the way we view certain things, Wayne Rooney's and these kind of people, I think we view it just a little bit different. I think because we are seeing the game so much more from a, how can I say, maybe I'm talking about from my generation, because you look up to these guys that they're superheroes and stuff. But I think we're looking at it so much from a tactical point of view now that I do think we're going to kind of remove ourselves from the gloss of what a KDB is doing, a gloss of from what Gundogan or whoever you want to say, because we see the game I just think we just see the game a little bit less glamorous now. And I think it can affect, not saying it will, I just think it can affect it, and we have to wait. That's something we're going to have to wait 5 years for, how we're going to look back on these guys. Right now, they're all the GOATs, because everyone goes in the moment, they're reactionary. But I think in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, we might look at it and still just be like, yeah, he's up there, but he's not the best. He's not this. I think it will change. Our viewpoints will change, I think. That's what I think, a little bit.
That's interesting. To be fair, I don't know how I think about that, to be honest with you. I can definitely hear that argument. And to be fair, I mean, like, you say that about that.
I don't think it's fair on the players, by the way. I don't think it's fair on the players. I think
someone like Scholes is probably hurt in that regard as well, too, because we kind of look at him as like a byproduct of the Fergie era. Rather than like, okay, well, he was basically
but look how long it took. Look how long it took Scholes to get his flowers.
Yeah, it took people from a different country talking about.
you really have to go in a deep dive to give Scholes his flowers, because Scholes did feel like he was part of the system. And we have to you really have to be like, do you know what? I know, but I'm going to show you why Scholes is good. Whereas I can just deliver you some moments and show you why Lampard's good. Deliver you some moments, show you why Gerrard's good, or Vieira, whoever. But I do think that there is going to be more aspect. That's a good example of like the Paul Scholes in the future, because I just think we're going to talk about tactic.
To be fair, though, you're probably not.
Look how Aguero has been removed.
Yeah, but he wasn't much under Pep. Maybe that's just a City thing.
Maybe you're right. No, but obviously Pep is the best manager. So
but
he's
Pep,
kind
Aguero,
of like
my
the
point is he still had
rank.
7 years before that at City, where he was probably better than he was under Pep. But I was gonna go. I hear that. I hear that point. But I still think, like, you look at this game almost in isolation as a perfect example of what I'm about to say. I still think, as much as we talk managers, the fact that this ended in a boring stalemate kind of still shows you how important the individuals are. Because we look at this game, and as brilliant as Pep and Arteta were in their own right, the players, I think a lot of them flattered to deceive from an individualistic standpoint. Like, you look at Saka, who's been Arsenal's best attacker, in my opinion, was mostly quiet throughout the game. Odegaard had to do a lot of defending, if anything. De Bruyne, really since his injury, barred that spell versus Newcastle. I know people will talk about, I think he's averaging a goal contribution every 50 minutes. But if we're looking objectively at Kevin De Bruyne, it doesn't feel like the best version of himself. Haaland was stifled the entire game due to a lack of service.
Similar to him as well, since he's come back from injuries, scoring about.
Foden as well too didn't have his best game whatsoever for a creative player. Didn't do enough during the game. So we talk about all of that stuff, and we talk about the fact that it was a boring 0-0 game. So as brilliant as the managers were, individuals still decide the outcome of the game. Like, one of those guys playing at their max capacity probably decides that game.
Absolutely. You know, what you're saying is right, but what I'm saying is, have we walked away from the game saying that? But has that been the focus? The focus hasn't been that. That's what I'm trying to say. The focus hasn't been, I said on the agendas of Saka v Foden. The focus hasn't been KDB. It hasn't been Haaland. Well, Roy Keane drew him out, but the focus hasn't been that enough. You know what I'm trying to say? It hasn't been that enough. It's been about the tactics. It's been about how Arsenal deployed themselves. It's been about how City deployed themselves. It hasn't been enough about the players, and that's what I hate. We're talking about the biggest teams. These are the two teams that they both can't get to the final anymore, but one of them you might expect to get to the final potentially. Who knows? Of the Champions League.
Yeah, you can make the argument they're the best two teams on the planet.
You can make the argument. The Arsenal are definitely the best defensive team at the moment, where it looks like it. I saw Real Madrid have conceded less goals, but as a unit, when you're watching the game, it feels like Arsenal, right? But so you want to talk about the gigantic players that these guys have. I just feel like we just walk away from these games not talking about them things, bro.
But I definitely think that the next few years are going to see a change in that, to be honest with you. Because again, I keep going back on it. As much as I agree with what you're saying, I still think it's the players that dictate what direction football goes in. And I look at this new crop of the young gen. And I want to make this a whole video on another day when we really purely look at this new generation of footballers that's kind of rising to the top. And I look at the Lamine Yamals of the world. I look at currently the Bellinghams and the Musialas, the Florian Wirtz. To be fair, he kind of reminds me of a Pep player in a way, if I'm being completely honest. But like the Musialas, the Bellinghams, maybe if you even the Viniciuses, for example, as well too. These game-breaking individuals that still have that physical size and stature that the modern day elite players have. I think they're going to drive the game now in a different back to an older generation in terms of like the game still goes through them.
But I don't know,
and I think managers will have to adapt to that as well too.
But I think it's going to take a manager who deploys them in a way that you can see the maximum of these guys' capabilities, and then it takes years for generations to follow, because you said players dictate the game, but managers have as well. Pep has influenced football. Pep has changed football.
But you have to.
Pep has changed the 20 years of football.
But let's not pretend though that Pep has been the same guy for the last 20 years. Pep has also adapted himself every single year since he entered the game to also the changing climate of football.
But his during the game, but his principle and what brought him to prominence and what made everybody think, okay, Pep is this guy, was his way of playing, was the shorter kind of players, was this technical ability.
But that's my whole point. You look at it now, it's a complete, this is the antithesis of what we saw about Barca.
But it's 50-50 because if you see what England are producing, for example, right, in their academies and stuff, there's so much more like what you would have seen Spain producing back then. It's funny because they say it takes 20 years to make a generation, right? It's genuinely a thing that Pep Guardiola, the way he impacted the game, is still having trickling effects to academy level now.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You got to remember, it's going to take a while. So I do get what you're saying. But you said, like, for example, like a Florian Wirtz is like, and I'm not saying Kobe Mainoo was produced because of Pep. But it's definitely encouraged. Yeah. It's definitely encouraged. It's true. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And I think that's still going to be trickling through. And listen, that's not a bad thing, by the way. Pep had ballers, bro. The guys that he had were flipping all-timers, bro. Yeah. And these guys are all-timers. Like, we're not saying that they're it's bad for the game or anything like that. But I do think managers do impact it, bro. I think it's managers. I think it's managers that dictate. I think it takes a generational manager to dictate, and then everybody follows. That's how I see it, you know.
I do, but I still stand by the fact that he dictates it based on the players that he has. Because you look at that first Barca team, dictated on the players that he kind of inherited. Of course, I'm not trying to say he took over that Barca team and was just ready to go. He had to do some changes. But Iniesta, Xavi, and Messi were the heartbeat of that team. He then went to Bayern and like.
But he picked it up from his roots.
Of course, but it's also it's also like
he could have said, if he didn't want Iniesta, he would have said, let me go and bring in my Jude Bellingham. You know what I mean? He would have said, let me go and bring in, but he knew what he wanted. Yeah. He rose that to prominence.
I hear you.
So I don't know.
It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
What came first, Iniesta or Pep?
Man, honestly, because if you look back at it, like, you look at what people talk about with Cruyff, you look at Pep, you look at Arrigo Sacchi that people talk about going all the way back to World War times. Herbert Chapman that people talk about. Like, these are guys.
Who's the guy who used to coach Inter, Helenio or something like that.
Yeah, then you've got Rinus Michels.
Yeah, Rinus Michels. Yeah.
So I do think managers dictate the way football goes. I don't think it's the players, but the players should be the superstars. That's what I think. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I stand by it. I think players are the ones that managers are the ones that
encourages these players, because the players are hatched. Like, you're talking about like a chicken and egg.
Yeah,
the players are hatched, but somebody has to coach these players into being certain.
Of course,
and that comes from the ideologies of the top managers.
Yeah, but I still look at all these managers that you're naming.
Why are now England producing all these little techie man? We never used to produce that.
No, that's because Pep is also like all conquering in terms of like this decade. He's like overseen it completely. Pep is just that guy. But like before Pep,
that's like, he's Zordon, you know.
He's like Thanos, bro. Pep goes to different countries. Like Germany, you're gonna play like this. England, you're gonna play like this. Pep's gonna go to Algeria next, and we're gonna be producing tiki taka. All right, yeah. That was an interesting discussion, guys. Definitely let us know what you think. Yeah, I guess that's the question for you guys. Yeah, you know how I did that one thing on Twitter that one time, and then we got some answers from people. Twitter, comments down below. Let us know. What is it that dictates an era in terms of how football is played and the direction football goes? Is it the manager, or is it the players that kind of impact the manager's way of thinking? Let us know. Give us your thoughts on that. Yeah.